talkies. Buckle up. How do you go from this to this using all of this? Here's how. Play tape.
And cut.
You have no idea how long that intro just took. Hey team, so if you want to know how I did that opening sequence, stick around to the end of the video and I'll show you. Capiche? Nah, I'm not going to show you my capiche. Okay, enough mucking about. Today's shoot requires all of the below and behind. And if you want to know about any of this stuff, I'll leave information in the description right next to the subscribe button. Okay, first up, camera for a prop. My trusty 5D Mark III. It's got a 24mm Sigma art on the front, and on the front of that, I'm going to put an ND filter for a nice flat surface. And it's sat on a Gorillapod so we can get low to the ground. And of course, it's doggy strap. Next up, lighting. This is my Pixapro Citi600. It's basically a Godox AD600 with different branding. On the front of that, we've got a Fresnel Lens for that theatrical spotlight. And that is accompanied by these. This is a regular Speedlite, and that is a PIKA200, which is roughly 2 to 3 times more powerful than that, and 2 to 3 times less powerful than that. And they all get controlled by this little badger. It's not a badger, it's a ST3 TTL-T. It basically just controls all 3 lights wirelessly. Result. And the speed lights get placed in these little things like so. And then on the front of those, things. Yeah? This is my little CTO gel kit. They go on the front of those lights and they create a nice little sunset effect. And lastly, my cute little teeny weeny little tripod. How cute is this thing? And on top of that, the show-stopping Sony a7 III. Which is what I'm going to shoot this picture with. Right, come on you lot. Okay, here we go. Come on. Okay, let me show you what we've got here. Okay, we're going to start with the big light, which has got a strip box on it and a grid on the front. So we have our rim light here, or kicker light. It's a Pixapro Citi600 TTL model, although we're going to be shooting it in manual. We'll set it with the controller, and with this little wheel here, we can control the output on Group B, and we'll set it to 1/4 power, see how we get on, and we can tweak it as we go along. Okay, follow me. Directly across from the kicker light is my spotlight sunlight effect. This is powered by a PIKA200 Pro. Again, it's a Godox AD200 with different packaging. On the front of that is my Fresnel Lens. And inside there, we've got a full cut CTO gel, and it's being held in with a rubber band that comes in the kit. I'll just switch this on here. And output wise, we're going to set this to Group A all the way down to 1/2 power. And lastly, an overhead fill light, Group C on full power. Okay, remote control, 2-second timer. Here we go. Okay, camera settings. We've got a 14mm ultra wide angle lens on the front, super sharp. It's a manual lens, so we're going to have to dial in the distance, and we're going to focus stack 2 images. The first image will be for the camera itself, and then the second image will be for me. ISO 100 for maximum image quality. The shutter speed is 250th of a second, which is the maximum sync speed for these lights that we're using. You might be wondering why I'm using lights on a bright sunny day. Well, it's because we can overpower the sun and create more drama. We're an Aperture f16. Let's shoot this baby. Okay, a couple of things before we kick off this masterpiece. Please think about subscribing. I'm going to be releasing a video every week. Secondly, I'm not sponsored by Pixapro in this video. I just like their products and their service, and the ability to trigger 3 lights with 1 unit is brilliant. Also, during the shoot, I did tweak that 600-watt kicker light only by 2/3 of a stop, but it made a real difference on the side and the back of me. And lastly, because we were using a 14mm lens at f/16, I was able to dial in the focus at 1 meter, which was roughly equidistant between my camera and my face. My near focus point was 28 centimeters, which was exactly where the camera was, and everything beyond that and to infinity was in focus, so I didn't need to focus back to images. Okie doke, so we've got our image open in Photoshop here, along with our final edit, which is where we're heading. The background is obviously quite unfavourable. Ideally, I would like to shoot this image in a real environment, but on a recent trip to St Paul's Cathedral, I found a really cool spot for an image like this. However, being the entrance to a shopping mall right by a national treasure like St Paul's, security was pretty tight, and setting up lights and tripods is pretty much out of the question. I was able to fire off a plate shot, which is going to form the background for our composite. So heading back to the main image here, we're going to make a copy of the background layer by dragging it to this little symbol here. And then we're going to head up to the quick selection tool, and we're going to select myself and the straps and the camera, and that's it. It doesn't need to be perfect at this stage, it just needs to be a general selection. So we have our selection made now, so we're going to make a layer mask out of that, and then we'll create a new layer and we're going to fill it with a green so we can see the selection more clearly. And we're just going to tidy up all of these rough edges on the selection. So with a brush, hardness set around 70%, we're going to be toggling between black and white on the layer mask and tidying up all of these edges. So that's our tidy selection made now. So we're going to go over to the St Paul's picture and we're going to drag that into our composite, and we'll just place it underneath the layer with myself, and then we'll just nudge it into place so it looks realistic. Then we'll just discard that green layer and we'll rename this to St Paul's, and then we'll rename this layer to Mark. Next up, we're going to add a color balance adjustment layer, and we're going to clip it to the Mark layer, and we're just going to try and match the two images in color now, introducing some cyans and some blues. A little before and after. And one more thing, we'll add a curves layer and clip it again to the Mark layer. Drag it all the way down. Invert the layer mask with Control or Command I, and with a brush set around 5% on flow, we'll just start painting in some of the darkness. Next up, we're going to blur the background. So we're going to create a copy of the St Paul's layer and we'll rename that to Blur. And then we'll head up to Filter, Blur and Gaussian Blur, and a radius of around 8 pixels. Next up, we'll create an inverted layer mask holding down the Alt key, and with the mask selected, we're going to choose a large soft brush set as white, and then we're going to reveal the blurred version of the St Paul's layer, and we want to try and keep the foreground part of that image in focus to create the depth. Moving on, create a new layer and we'll call this shadows. And then we'll head up to a black brush and we'll set the flow down to around 3%, and we'll start to introduce some shadows underneath the feet area so it looks realistic. A little before and after. Finally, one more layer. We'll rename this floor light, and with a nice warm orange yellow brush, flow down to around 3%, we'll start to paint in a directional light from the bottom right hand corner. We'll set this to a soft light, and I think we can take that a little bit further. Before and after. So heading up to the mark layer now, we're going to stamp down the mask by applying the layer mask, and we're going to convert this to a smart object. And we'll head up to filter and camera raw filter, and we want to try and match the color of the jeans to the background. So we're going to add some cyans to the hue of the blues. And one more change, we're going to add a little bit of clarity and commit those changes. I'm going to introduce some highlights now to the front part of my legs. So with a nice orangey warm yellow, we're going to take, again, a small brush, flow at 3%, we'll just start painting in some yellows. We'll change the layer to a soft light and just create a bit more. That's looking nice. The final piece of this composite is adding a reflection to the front part of the lens. So we're going to turn off the mark layer so we can see the background. We'll choose some pulls, and then with the elliptical marquee tool, we're going to create a selection of this part of the floor. Controller Command C to copy, and then Controller Command V to paste it right at the top of the stack. And we'll just turn back on my layer. We'll rename this reflection, and with the transform tool we'll just put that into place over the lens and commit that change. I'll change the layer to a pin light, and then we'll create a mask of that layer, and we'll just start tidying up with a black brush these edges to make it look a bit more realistic. And finally we're going to do a color balance adjustment layer to introduce some more warm yellows and oranges to the reflection. And I think we'll just tidy up the top part of the reflection, we don't want that. And finally I think we'll just reduce the opacity of that reflection, and I think we'll just make an adjustment on the shadows layer. So choosing the shadows, a black brush, flowed all the way down to 3 or 4%, and we'll just start painting in a little bit more blacks underneath these feet, and I think we're pretty good. Right, that opening sequence where I seemingly float across the floor being dragged by my camera. 156 individual images, bending down, moving the camera 1.5 inches, standing up, taking the picture, and repeat. Here's a time lapse.
And cut.
Ma! Meatloaf!